At Kinmiley's church, we're running a short series of midweek videos about favourite characters in the Bible, and I've chosen to tell you about a young woman called Esther. There's a whole book in the Bible about her story, and it's well worth the read. Esther's parents died when she was in infancy, and she was adopted and brought up by her cousin Mordecai in the city of Susa in Persia. Her family were Jewish, and many of her fellow country people were living throughout Persia, which is now called Iran. Esther grew up to be a very beautiful young woman, and when the king divorced Queen Vashti, he looked for another woman who would be queen. Esther was among the young women to be considered, and eventually she was chosen to be the new queen. Although Esther remained faithful to God, she never disclosed her Jewish background or her faith in God to the king until the very end. The story continues with intrigue and plots and counterplots, one of which was to assassinate the king. However, Mordecai heard about it and told Queen Esther, who was able to warn the king, and the culprits were found and dealt with. The intrigue ramps up when another character called Haman became the king's chief advisor. He was a pompous and a vain man, and he was furious when Esther's cousin Mordecai refused to bow down to him. When he heard that Mordecai was a Jew and worshipped God, Haman decided to get rid of the Jews. He decided he would ask the king to sign a decree for the annihilation of all Jews in the empire. After a further unexpected twist, the king decided to honour Mordecai for the part he played in saving the king's life in the earlier assassination attempt. Haman was completely humiliated and was furious, and he set a date for his plan to destroy the Jews. Queen Esther, her maids, Mordecai, and all the Jewish people began a time of fasting and prayer to God, asking for his intervention. Then Esther formed a plan in which she was able to ask that the king would spare the lives of herself and her people, who were to be annihilated at the decree of Haman. The king was incensed that Haman would do such a thing, and he had Haman put to death. The decree to kill the Jewish people was superseded, and God enabled his people to stand against their enemies and live. I like Esther because although she was physically beautiful, it was her inner characteristics of wisdom, honour, compassion, and faithfulness to her family and to God that shone through. She got her priorities right. She prayed and asked God for help in a life-threatening situation. She was also very human. She was afraid of this death threat for herself and her family, and very fearful about how to broach the subject with the king and ask him to stop the slaughter of the Jewish people. In these times, not even the queen could speak to the king unless he requested it. She realized that only God could resolve this awful calamity. I also like the story of Esther because it reminds me that God was working behind the scenes. God was in it all. There was a divine purpose for all the decisions and events told, although none of that became clear until the very end. The ultimate outcome was that God brought about his purpose to save the Jews, but he used ordinary people like Esther and Mordecai to play their part in his plan. And God's timing is spot on. I find this encouraging because it shows that God can use any of us in our everyday lives to bring hope and blessing to others. In uncertain times, and we are definitely in uncertain times, the story of Esther reminds us to pray and to wait for God to take action. He has a much bigger plan than we can imagine. Now, you need to go and read the book of Esther for yourself.